I stood there, staring at the sign, a simple sign, but it meant everything. Private property, HOA controlled, my road, my freedom, all gone, without even asking. I had no say, no voice, just a homeowner. A little piece of my life was stolen. But what happened next? I decided to take matters into my own hands, and trust me, you won't believe what I did next. Welcome to the HOA unit, where we dig into the drama, power trips, and shocking stories from suburban life. I'm Mark. I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, but trust me, things aren't as peaceful as they seem. In today's story, you'll hear how I lost my road to the HOA, but didn't just accept it. No, I took action. Grab your popcorn. This one's a wild ride. I never thought a road could be the thing that changed everything. One moment it was just another quiet afternoon in the neighborhood, the kind where kids are running around, the smell of freshly cut grass fills the air, and everything just feels normal. But that day, everything would change. I was walking out to my driveway when I saw it. The road sign. At first, I didn't even understand what I was seeing. The letters were bold, but my brain refused to register the reality. The sign said, "Private property, HOA controlled," in big, ugly black font. My eyes locked onto those words, the words that were just wrong. That road had been mine. For years, I'd driven down it every single day. I'd watched the sun rise and set from that road. I knew the cracks, the potholes, the trees lining the sides. The road was a part of my life, part of my daily routine. Yet, here it was, stolen from me. I glanced around. No one else seemed to notice. Cars were still passing by. My neighbors were still coming in and out of their driveways. How could they not see it? How could they not notice what had just happened? I looked around again, but this time something shifted. It was no longer just a road. It felt like something bigger. Something personal had been taken from me. A small piece of my life, my comfort, was suddenly controlled by the HOA. The HOA, the neighborhood governing body, the one that dictated rules, told us how to live. And now they had taken control of something as simple as a road. I walked over to the sign, my hands shaking just slightly as I touched it. It was real. I pulled out my phone. Maybe I was missing something. Maybe I hadn't read it properly. But no. It was exactly as I saw it. I stood there for a few moments, the weight of it all sinking in. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was deliberate. They had just taken something without asking, without telling me, without anything. I had lived here for years, paid my dues, never been in trouble. But now, my road was no longer mine. I snapped a picture of the sign, and I felt something stir inside me. Something deep, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. How dare they? I walked back to my house, trying to shake off the feeling. It was just a road, right? It wasn't that important. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The HOA had overstepped. They had crossed a line. I thought about going inside and just letting it go. Maybe it wasn't worth fighting. Maybe I was overreacting. But then, I remembered. I remembered how they had once tried to fine me for my mailbox being a centimeter too high. A centimeter! They had sent me a letter demanding I fix it, or else. I had followed their rules, of course, but that was the first time I had felt their power, their control over my life. This was worse, much worse. I sat down on my couch, my mind racing. My phone buzzed. A new notification. It was from the HOA. I clicked on it without thinking. Ramen, Dare, HOA Property Regulations. I clicked it open. There it was. A list of rules and regulations, along with a reminder about the recent updates in the neighborhood. Updates. It felt like a slap in the face. It was clear now. They had made their move. They wanted control over everything, even things that weren't theirs. I looked at the sign again, still fresh in my mind. The words were clear. HOA controlled. But what did that mean for me? What else would they take next? I had to find out. But I couldn't just ignore this. This wasn't something I could walk away from. And that's when I knew. I couldn't sit back. I couldn't let them get away with this. Something needed to be done. But what? I had no idea what I was about to get myself into. I had no idea how far this would go. But in that moment, I made a decision. I would fight back. It didn't take long for the HOA president to show up. I knew she'd come. I knew this was far from over. The moment I saw that sign, I knew they'd try to confront me, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon. It was a Wednesday morning, the kind of morning that felt like any other, except for the heavy weight of knowing that I had just lost something that should have been mine. My own damn road. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I heard the knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. I wasn't surprised. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I was about to face something I couldn't ignore. I opened the door, and there she was. The HOA president. Her perfect smile was the first thing I noticed. The kind of smile that looked like it belonged on a corporate advertisement. The smile that said, "I'm here to help." But I could see it in her eyes, something cold, something calculating. "Good morning," she said, her voice smooth as butter. "I hope you're doing well today." I didn't trust her words. I knew she wasn't here to offer any help. She wasn't even here to apologize. No, she was here to fix the mess they'd made, on their terms. "I need to talk to you about the road," she continued, still smiling. "I'm sure you've noticed the new signs." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "I've noticed." Her eyes flickered for a second. Was it guilt, regret, or was it just the realization that she was caught? "Well," she said, straightening up, "the road has been rezoned. It's all part of a larger plan to improve the neighborhood." "Improve?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "By taking my road?" Her smile never faltered, but the edge in her voice was clear now. "We're not taking anything, per se. It's just that the road is now under the HOA's jurisdiction." Jurisdiction. That word stuck in my head. They weren't just controlling the road. They were claiming it, like it was some piece of property they owned. "Well, I don't think it's your decision to make," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That road has been part of the neighborhood for as long as I can remember." She nodded slowly, like she was waiting for me to calm down. "I understand how this might be a bit unexpected, but the HOA's decisions are for the greater good of the community." I felt my hands clench into fists. "The greater good," I repeated. "Or is it the greater control?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough to make me feel like I'd hit a nerve. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone soft but firm. "This is a small change. It's necessary for the neighborhood's development." "Development?" It was a small, quiet neighborhood. We didn't need development. We needed our space, our privacy, our roads, not their meddling hands. But I didn't let my anger show. Well, I don't agree with your plan, and I'm not going to accept it without a fight. For the first time, her smile faltered, just a little. She quickly recovered, though, her composure returning in a heartbeat. I see, she said, ping back. I'll make a note of that. We'll be in touch. And just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left standing there, staring at the place where she'd stood. I couldn't believe what had just happened. How could she come to my door, smile at me, and treat me like I was the one in the wrong? I walked to the window, looking out at the road. The sign was still there, bold, undeniable. It felt like a personal attack, and I wasn't going to let them win. The next few days were a blur of angry thoughts and restless nights. I couldn't get the image of that sign out of my head. Every time I drove down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My road, my freedom, wasn't mine anymore. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. I needed a plan. I spent hours thinking about my options. Should I just call the HOA and plead my case? Would they listen? Of course not. They didn't care about my feelings, my concerns, or my rights. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I wasn't just going to stand by while they took everything I had worked for. That's when it hit me. I wasn't going to fight them with logic or appeals. No, I would fight them with their own rules. I would become the perfect model homeowner. And in the process, I would destroy everything they stood for. I knew I had to do it carefully. I couldn't just come out and say, I'm going to fight back. I had to play the long game. I had to make them regret ever thinking they could control me. But how? I smiled to myself. The answer was simple. Follow every rule. Every single one. I would become the HOA's dream homeowner. I would follow their rules down to the letter, and then I would make sure they knew the consequences of their own policies. I'd start small. Maybe. I'd start by following their parking regulations. Maybe I'd even paint my lawn chairs beige like they wanted. The point was, I would make them pay for taking my road. I wasn't going to give up. Not yet. I just needed to play it smart and wait for the perfect moment. It started innocently enough. Just me, following the rules, or at least pretending to. I figured it'd be simple, right? If I just did everything they asked, maybe the HOA would leave me alone. Maybe I could get back to my life, free from the stress, the tension, the constant feeling that I was being watched. I had no idea how wrong I was. The first thing I did was get to work on my driveway. The moment I parked my car, I realized something. The driveway, my driveway, was now technically under their jurisdiction, just like the road, just like everything else they controlled. But instead of getting upset about it, I did what I had to do. I parked my car perfectly in the middle of the driveway, exactly like the rules said. I mean, why not follow the rules? It seemed like the smartest way to avoid any further confrontation. The HOA wanted control? Fine, let them have it, for now. But this wasn't just about following their rules. This was about manipulating their rules. Over the next few days, I became the perfect homeowner. Every morning, I checked my mailbox to make sure it was at the exact right height. I trimmed my bushes to their exact specifications. My lawn? Pristine. I even measured the height of my fence just to make sure it was within the limit. I was playing their game, but I was in control now. But things weren't as peaceful as I thought they'd be. The first notice arrived a week later. Violation, Unauthorized parking. I couldn't believe it. I had parked exactly where I was supposed to. The lines on the driveway were perfectly aligned. I stared at the notice in disbelief. I had followed their rules down to the letter, and yet they were still coming after me. This wasn't just about parking. No, it was about contras. The HOA was getting bolder. They weren't content with their first power grab. They wanted more. They were going to test me. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I followed every rule, even harder. I followed their instructions to the letter. I got my lawn chairs in the exact shade of beige they wanted. I cut my grass every 2 days, just like they recommended. I even painted the fence with the exact shade of white they required. But it wasn't enough. Another notice arrived. Violation, lawn color not approved. I was furious. The grass was perfectly green. But it didn't matter to them. They wanted control over everything. They wanted to make sure I knew who was in charge. I wasn't going to let them win, though. I didn't just get upset. I didn't rage. I just smiled. I knew what I had to do. The next day, I went out to the backyard and took down the lawn chair that was incorrect. I replaced it with one of their approved beige chairs. I mowed the lawn again. I even added more flowers. Bright, cheerful flowers, just as they liked it. I was their ideal homeowner, and I was going to make them regret ever pushing me this far. Days passed, and I could feel them watching me. They were waiting for me to slip up. But the more I followed the rules, the more I realized they had no idea what they were dealing with. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about power, and I wasn't about to let them have all of it. Soon, the notices started to pile up. They were relentless. One after another, violations, threats, fines. But I didn't care. I had a plan. I was playing their game, but I was playing it better. Then, I got a letter that caught me off guard. Final warning. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Legal action. I almost laughed. They didn't realize what they were dealing with. They thought they had me cornered, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't about to back down. I was about to turn the tables. I spent the next few days preparing. I gathered all the documents, the pictures, the proof that I had followed their rules every step of the way. I even had the receipts for the approved lawn chairs. The HOA had made a mistake, a huge mistake. They had underestimated me. And now it was time to show them just how far I was willing to go. I wasn't just going to let them intimidate me anymore. I wasn't going to let them push me around like they had done with everyone else. I was going to fight back, and I was going to make sure they knew exactly who they were messing with. But what could I do? They had the legal power. They had the money. They had everything. Or so they thought. That's when the idea hit me. I needed to hit them where it would hurt. The next few days felt like a war, quiet, slow, and building. I could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just the letters anymore. It was the constant watching. The eyes on me, on my house, on every move I made. The HOA had sent their first warning, and I knew they weren't going to stop until they broke me. But they didn't realize. I was playing a much bigger game now. I spent the next few days following their rules with military precision. No lawn chair was out of place. The mailbox was at exactly the right height. Even the hedges in my front yard were trimmed to their exact specifications. If they wanted a perfect lawn, they were going to get it. And then some. But things didn't get easier. They got more complicated. The moment I thought I was safe, another letter arrived. Violation. Unauthorized tree placement. I stared at the letter for a long time, trying to process what I was reading. Unauthorized tree placement? There was no tree in my front yard. Sure, there was a small shrub, but a tree. I shook my head. I had been playing by the rules. I had trimmed my shrub, maintained my yard, and followed every instruction like I was their ideal homeowner, and yet they were still coming after me. It wasn't just the fines anymore. It was the constant barrage of rules, inspections, and threats. Every day there was a new notice. Violation, incorrect paint color on fence. Violation, fence height exceeds limit. And these weren't even the major ones. These were petty, small things designed to wear me down. It was clear now. They weren't just after my road. They were after everything. Every detail of my life, down to the smallest leaf. But what did they want? Power? Control? Or was it just because they could? I couldn't keep playing this game forever. I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. One day, as I stood in front of my house watching the workers who were fixing the neighbor's lawn, I got an idea. What if I could make them think I was going to comply with every single rule? What if I could follow their instructions so perfectly that they would expect it from me? Then, when the time was right, I could hit them with something they never saw coming. It felt like the perfect plan. I would make them think they had broken me, that they had turned me into a compliant little soldier in their perfect little neighborhood. But in the end, I would be the one controlling the situation. I smiled to myself, but the thought of how long I'd have to keep up this charade, it made my stomach turn. I wasn't the kind of person who played nice with the HOA. I hated the thought of being one of their puppets. But in the end, it was all about getting back what was rightfully mine. Over the next few days, I put my plan into motion. I made sure every blade of grass was in its place. I bought new, approved lawn decorations. I even started painting the fence a perfect white, even though I hated the color. But the deeper I sank into their rules, the more I realized something else is happening, something unexpected. I was starting to become the perfect model homeowner. I was starting to like it. It wasn't just about following the rules anymore. It was about winning, and I was good at it. Every time the HOA sent me a new notice, every time they tried to break me, I fought back. And I fought smarter. I knew what they were looking for. I knew exactly what they wanted. I could feel the power shift. They thought they had me under their thumb. They thought they were winning. But I wasn't the one being controlled. Every time they sent me another notice, I just smiled and followed their instructions. They didn't know it yet, but I was slowly but surely turning the tables. But then, the next letter came. Violation. You are in violation of HOA zoning law. Immediate action required. I knew something was different about this one. The urgency in their tone wasn't like the usual passive-aggressive threats. This one felt personal. I tore it open, almost afraid of what I might find. Immediate action required. I read it again. Immediate action required. What were they planning? What was their next move? I stood up, the papers still in my hand, my mind racing. I wasn't sure what the HOA had in store, but I could feel the tension building to a boiling point. This wasn't going to stop until one of us broke, and this time, I wasn't going to be the one to back down. I had a plan now. They were going to learn that I could play this game too. But what would be their next move? I could feel the pressure mounting with each passing day. The HOA wasn't backing off, and with every letter, every notice, it became clear that they weren't going to stop until they broke me. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I had already decided. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine without a fight. The road, my property, my peace. They thought they could control everything, but they had no idea what they were up against. I had spent the last few days planning my next move carefully, every step, Every detail had to be perfect. I needed to play their game, but I needed to make sure I was always 2 steps ahead. I spent hours studying the HOA's rules, every little clause, every regulation. I knew it was all about control, about keeping everyone in line. They had set up this perfect system where they could fine people for the smallest offenses, where they could dictate every aspect of their lives, from the height of their mailbox to the color of their flowers. But I had something they didn't expect. I had patience, and I was about to turn their own system against them. I started by following the rules more closely than ever before. I mean, perfectly. I didn't just cut my grass to the right height. I measured it with a ruler. I didn't just paint the fence white. I painted it the exact shade of white they had specified. I even installed new, perfectly symmetrical flower beds just to make sure they couldn't find anything wrong. I was their dream homeowner. I was playing their game, but I was playing it better. I followed every rule they had, to the letter. But here's where I had the advantage. They didn't realize how carefully I was watching them. I was studying their every move. Every time they sent me a notice, every time they made a threat, I took mental notes. I was learning how they operated. And that's when I realized something. They were bluffing. The HOA was using the same tactics over and over again. Small fines, petty threats, vague accusations. It was all a game of intimidation. They didn't have as much power as they thought. The more I complied, the more I could see it. They were bluffing their way through this. They were used to people caving under pressure, following the rules just enough to avoid trouble. But I wasn't like the other homeowners. I wasn't scared of their threat. No, I was about to flip the script. I spent the next few days preparing. I gathered every document, every notice, every fine they had ever sent me. I even started taking photos of every violation they had accused me of. It was a meticulous process, but I had time. I was playing the long game, and I knew I was winning. I started reaching out to other neighbors. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had been dealing with their petty rules and fines. Several of my neighbors had been receiving notices too. Some had been too scared to fight back. Some had just paid the fines. But a few of them were just as fed up as I was. We formed an alliance. The plan was simple. I would keep following their rules to the letter, and in the meantime, I would gather evidence. Once we had enough, we'd go public. We'd expose the HOA for what they really were, a bully hiding behind a veil of authority. It was time to take back control. But I couldn't do this alone. The HOA needed to be shown that they couldn't just walk over people and get away with it. They needed to see that people were willing to fight back. I started filing complaints with the local government. I made sure I kept detailed records of everything, the fines, the notices, the harassment. I was building my case, brick by brick. But even as I did all of this, I could feel the HOA tightening its grip. They started sending me even more notices, more fines. They were getting desperate, but they didn't realize something. The more they pushed, the stronger I became. One day, I came home to find a new letter on my doorstep. It wasn't from the HOA this time. It was from the local authorities. I tore open the envelope, my hands shaking. It was an official letter, stating that the zoning laws in our neighborhood were being reviewed, and that the HOA's actions would be scrutinized. This was it. This was my chance. I wasn't just following the rules anymore. I was taking action. I was going to make sure that the HOA's power was broken, that they couldn't just come into our lives and take what they wanted. But there was one last step. I had to make sure I had the upper hand. I needed a bombshell. So I went back to the HOA's zoning records. I dug deeper than I ever had before, looking for something, anything that could destroy their entire operation. And then I found it. A discrepancy in the zoning laws. The HOA had overstepped. They had made changes to the zoning that weren't legal. It wasn't just a technicality. It was a violation of the law. I couldn't believe my eyes. This was it, the piece of evidence that would take them down. I had always thought that the HOA was untouchable, that they could do whatever they wanted, impose whatever rules they chose, and that no one could stand up to them. But now, I had something they couldn't ignore. That zoning law discrepancy? It was a game changer. It wasn't just some minor detail, it was a direct violation of the law. A violation they had committed in plain sight, thinking no one would ever notice. But I had noticed, and I was going to use that information to bring them down. I didn't waste any time. I made a few calls to the local authorities, to people I knew who could help. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone who had been bullied by the HOA's petty rules, everyone who had ever been fined for something ridiculous, everyone who had ever felt like they were powerless. I was going to make sure they knew who was in charge now. But then, just as I was preparing to take the next step, I got a call from the HOA president. It wasn't the usual sweet voice this time. There was something different in her tone, something desperate. "Can we talk?" she asked, almost pleading. I knew it was coming. They'd figured it out. They knew I had something on them. They were going to try and make me back down, try and convince me to drop the whole thing. But I wasn't going to fall for that. I agreed to meet her. It was time to end this, once and for all. When I arrived at the meeting spot, I could see the panic in her eyes. She was trying to hold it together, but it was obvious she was scared. "I know what you found," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "But please, this doesn't have to go any further." I leaned forward, crossing my arms. "It's too late for that." Her eyes darted around the room, like she was looking for an escape. "You don't understand. If you make this public, it will destroy everything. The HOA, the neighborhood, everything we've worked for." She was trying to appeal to my emotions, but I wasn't buying it. She had already taken so much from me. So much from everyone in this neighborhood. It was time for them to face the consequences. "What you've worked for?" I asked, my voice steady. "You've worked to control people, to impose rules that make no sense. You've worked to take away their freedom, to make them scared of you. That's what you've worked for." She didn't have an answer. She just stared at me, her face pale. "We can settle this without it going public," she said, her voice now trembling. "I can make this all go away. We can fix the zoning issue. We'll remove the fines. You'll get your road back. Just don't tell anyone about the violation." I almost laughed. She was trying to make a deal. She was offering me everything I wanted, hoping that I'd just walk away. But it was too late for that. I had already made up my mind. "No," I said firmly. "It's not just about me anymore. It's about everyone you've hurt. Everyone who's been intimidated by your power, who's been fined for the smallest things. You can't just erase this. You don't get to control the narrative anymore." Her face was a mixture of anger and fear now. "You're making a mistake. This will ruin everything." I stood up, my decision final. "It's too late for you to fix it. You've made your bed. Now you're going to lie in it." As I walked away, I could hear her shouting after me. But I didn't turn around. It was over. I had played my cards right. I had all the evidence. And now I was going to make sure the HOA paid for their actions. The next day I went to the local news station. I gave them everything. The zoning violation, the fines, the threats, the letters. I didn't hold back. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when everything came crashing down for the HOA. By the time the story aired, The HOA was already in damage control mode. They issued a statement claiming that it was all a mistake, that they had no idea the zoning was wrong, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. Neighbors who had been too scared to speak up before were now coming forward, telling their own stories about the fines, the harassment, and the way the HOA had overstepped their boundaries. People were angry. People were ready to fight back. But then, just when I thought it was all over, I received one final letter from the HOA. It was a formal apology. "We understand that we've made mistakes," the letter read. "We apologize for the actions taken, and we are working to resolve the zoning issue." I almost didn't believe it. They were apologizing. After everything they had done, they were apologizing. But as I read the letter over again, a small smile crept across my face. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when the tables had finally turned. I had done it. I had taken back control. I couldn't believe it at first. The letter from the HOA felt surreal, like a victory that hadn't quite sunk in. But as I read their apology again, something gnawed at me. They were sorry? Really? After everything they'd put me through, everything they'd taken from me, they just expected me to accept an apology and move on? I wasn't that easy. I'd fought too hard to let them off the hook so quickly. No, this wasn't over. Not yet. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The HOA had only apologized because they were scared. They were scared of the power I had uncovered, the truth I'd exposed. They were scared of the people who had begun to speak up, the residents who had finally realized that they didn't have to be afraid of the HOA anymore. The HOA president's smile from our earlier meeting, her desperate plea for me to back down, was still fresh in my mind. This wasn't a real apology. This was damage control. I wasn't interested in making peace. I wasn't interested in settling this quietly. No, I wanted them to feel what it was like to be on the other side of the power they'd abused for so long. I wanted them to know what it felt like to be afraid, to feel powerless. I sat down that night and made a plan. This was going to be my final act. I started with the letter, the one where they had admitted to the zoning violation. It was the piece I needed to finish the job. But I wasn't going to just keep it to myself. I was going to make sure the whole neighborhood knew. I was going to send it to every resident, every person who had ever felt like they were being bullied by the HOA. They deserved to know the truth. But I wasn't going to stop there. I contacted the local news again, but this time I had something bigger. I sent them all the documents, the zoning violation, the fines, the illegal tactics they'd used to intimidate us. And this time, I included the HOA president's apology letter. The moment it hit the news, it exploded. People were furious. They were outraged that the HOA had been allowed to control so much of their lives. They were even angrier that they'd tried to cover it up with a fake apology. But I wasn't just sitting back and watching it all unfold. I was right there, front and center, making sure the truth came out. The HOA was exposed for what they really were. A corrupt group of people who believed they could do anything simply because they held a little bit of power. The phone calls started coming in. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up now called me, thanking me. They had been intimidated too, but they'd kept quiet because they didn't think anyone would believe them. Now they knew they weren't alone. I was flooded with messages from people who wanted to know how they could help, how they could fight back. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about reclaiming my road, my property, my peace. This was about something bigger. This was about standing up to the system. This was about showing people that they didn't have to live in fear of the HOA or any other group that thought they could control their lives. The HOA tried to fight back, of course. They sent out more letters, trying to regain control, threatening lawsuits, trying to intimidate people into silence. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The neighborhood had come together. The power had shifted. And then something unexpected happened. The HOA president resigned. It was a swift and almost anticlimactic end to the whole ordeal. One minute she was sending out threatening letters, the next she was gone. But even though I'd won, I couldn't help but wonder, was this truly over? Yes, the HOA had been exposed. Yes, they were gone from power. But the real question lingered in the back of my mind. Was this a victory for me, or just the beginning of a bigger fight? What happens now that the people have seen what can happen when they stand up? What happens when the system starts to crack, and people realize they have the power to make change? I had broken free of the HOA, but I knew that the fight was bigger than one person, one neighborhood. The whole system of control that the HOA represented, it wasn't going away. It might not be in my neighborhood anymore, but it was out there, and someone else would have to fight it eventually. But for now, I could rest. I had taken back my road, my peace, my life. I had played their game and won. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but feel, what if? What if the fight wasn't over? What if someone else had to pick up where I left off?